You are listening to Workplace Stories, a podcast by Red Thread Research about the near future of work.
I'm Stacia Gar, co-founder and principal analyst at Red Thread.
And I'm Danny Johnson, co-founder and principal analyst at Red Thread.
And I'm Chris Pirrie of the Learning Futures Group. And you're listening to Season 6 of Workplace Stories, a season we call The Great Reconnection.
We would like to thank our friends at Torch for sponsoring this podcast season. Torch is the people development platform that fuels leadership development through the power of trusted relationships. By combining coaching, mentoring, and collaborative learning, Torch helps you develop successful leaders aligned with your organization's strategies and values. Visit trch.info for more information.
In this episode, we talked to Dave Ulrich, a Rensis Likert professor at the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan and the founder of the RBL Group. Dave has spent most of his life thinking about human capabilities and how people practices affect the people, for sure, but also the ability of the organization to succeed. His models and his thinking on leadership and people practices are widely used in organizations across the globe. I've known Dave for years. I actually had the opportunity to work with him early on in my career. He's actually the one that flipped me from being an engineer to focusing on HR research because he showed me the value of people practices and what they can do for organizations. This was an incredibly rich discussion, so rich that I'm having a hard time summarizing it. But in our hour-long conversation, Dave touched on his journey to becoming an expert in HR. He talked about the trust and its importance to building connection. He actually laid out a model to help managers build trust with employees, which is foundation to connection. He talked about the dangers we face as a society, but also within companies if we can't connect with each other and find common ground. Dave also shared some really good examples of innovative actions taken by leaders to make the lives of their employees better and to build connection. There was an example of an organization working with Ukrainian women that was particularly poignant. There was also a common thread throughout this discussion on connection, kind of a subtle prompting to be kind in a world that right now seems really divisive. We appreciated having an hour with Dave. It's a fantastic conversation. We encourage you to listen. Dave, welcome to Workplace Stories, and thank you so much for taking some time to share your insights with our audience today.
Danny and Chris, it's just a privilege to be with you. We have a long history and a short history with the two of you, and look really forward to the dialogue. Thank you.
We like to start with just a few rapid questions, and this is just so our audience can get to know you a little bit. So first question is, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you would describe your work.
I'm an old guy, but I think young at heart. I've done a lot of thinking about what are the core values that I'm certain about that drive me, and there's two. I want to continue to learn. I think I'm an old guy who continues to learn. When I was teaching, I used to try to have 25% new material every 2 years. During COVID, I think that's been 25% every year, if not more. Yeah. And number two, I want to learn that creates value for others. So I want to do learning that helps others get better. Those are my two values that I've held on to.
I actually saw your post on LinkedIn today asking people, hey, how do you get people out of the cycle of recycling things that we've talked about for years and years and years? I thought it was really insightful and something that we struggle with as a research firm as well.
I struggle with that a lot. I just looked at it. I've been on calls all morning. In the first hour, it had 15,000 views, which is a good sign. And I think that's an issue in our, not only HR, it's just not HR, but I think we always want to learn from the previous generation. I said in that it's a short post, it's only 150 words, but my parents wanted me to learn from them, but I had to go learn it for myself. Mm-hmm. I wish HR people could learn from the legacy that's gone on before. I'll give you one quick example. I gave a talk to chief learning officers. Chris probably was in the audience as a chief learning officer a number of years ago. And I talked about the work by Chris Argyris, who is probably the father of learning, double loop learning feedback, just a brilliant man and a curmudgeon, because I had the chance to meet him a few times. But at the end of the session, half a dozen chief learning officers, now remember who I'm talking about, heads of learning from large companies, came up and said, how do you spell his name?
What?
And I thought, on the one hand, that's good. They want to know. On the other hand, what the blank? You don't even know the top learning thinker in the world today. And it was actually quite discouraging because these are well-intended people, but they're not building on history. They're not willing to learn from what's been done. And I think in again, I can't speak for other fields, but in the HR space, we get that quite often, which is troubling. I wish I knew how to stop it. And I wish I knew how to help people learn and build.
The big question here, Dave, is whether history can teach us anything in a world that is changing as rapidly and confoundedly as it is right now.
And the answer is, I don't know. I mean, the answer is yes and no. I mean, plus ça chose, plus c'est la même chose. That's bad French. I will have to translate it. The more things change, the more they stay the same. I mean, some of the principles are the same. I mean, leaders work with people. They set direction. I mean, there is a lot of change going on.
Yeah.
But I for example, somebody came up and posted recently, here's the 11 competencies of HR people that I think are critical. Number 3 was analytics. So I wrote them back. I said, you really believe in analytics? They said, I do. I said, do you realize we've got data from 100,000 people over 30 years? Oh, well, I don't really agree with it. Well, what the hey? I mean, you don't have to agree with it, but at least read it. And I agree, Chris. I think the only constant is change, but we've said that for years. Anyway, so Danny, thank you for reading it.
The point's well taken. I think doing your homework is essential.
And I'm guilty of that too. When people say, boy, have you looked at the work by Bandura? Have you looked at the work by this? I'll go look it up. And often the work is not on point. That's okay. But at least let's learn from each other. Let's not be so, I guess there's a postmodernist society that says whatever you think is right because you think it. Well, we can learn from each other. Anyway, Danny, thank you. I got off on that. I did a short post. I was worried about that post. I'm going to get flack because people will be.
Well, you probably will, but that's kind of the fun of it, right?
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay.
Talk to us a little bit about how you came to do this type of work. You obviously have a passion for it.
You're doing the thing that we all love. We love to tell our story. I'll do it quickly.
Okay.
I was on my way to law school decades ago before any of you except Chris were born. And that's an age issue. I took a course called Organizational Behavior, OB 321, where I was studying from a colleague, a professor, and he just captured my imagination. He said, the organizations where you live, work, and play shape how you think. They shape how you feel. Go study those organizations where you're working, where you're living. Go study the organizations where you worship, wherever you are, figure out what the organization's doing, and then write me a paper and show me what you learned. There were no assignments. I wrote a 10-page paper, 15 weeks. I wrote 15 10-page papers. I cheated. This is more than you want to know. I was an English major, so I was reading Shakespeare, King Lear and power. So I wrote a paper on power as an organizational phenomena in King Lear or Paradise Lost. I turned it into my English professor and I turned it into him. My English professor said, this is weird. He said, this is cool. Keep writing the papers, At the end of the semester, he said, nobody's ever written 10, 15-page papers. What are you doing? I'm going to law school. He said, don't do stupid. So anyway, and I took another course and I got captured. A final anecdote. I called my parents and I said, oh, Mom and Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm not going to go to law school. And they went, oh, Dave, we hope you'd be a noble son. And I said, no, I'm going to study OB. And they went, oh, yes, you're going to be a doctor. And I said, no, I'm not going to be a doctor. I'm going to study organizational behavior. And they said, what is that? And I said, I don't have a clue, but I'm intrigued. And by the way, I'm still the same. I look at organizations and try to improve them. We just got back from a vacation. We happened to do a twice delayed cruise. I called the ship's captain and said, I have some things that you could do to improve your productivity here dramatically. And I said that at dinner with my friends. And I said, I'm going to go talk to the captain. What for? I'm going to give him some ideas on improving productivity and making this ship better for all of us. And they said, Dave, please don't do that. Please don't do that. Do not let your obsession come over you. Final. My wife has a great psychologist. She says I have OCD. It's organizational compulsive disorder. So Danny, I feel that passion. And Chris, to your comment, even more in the last 2 years when human capital, people issues are at the center stage more than ever.
So important.
Yeah,
so important.
I think it's interesting. I think we love this podcast because we run into people that have that kind of passion. And I remember the first time I sort of got that, it was actually attending one of your workshops, Dave. One of your coworkers had said, Wayne Brockbank actually said, hey, come see what we do. And if you don't like it, we'll never bug you again. And I went and quit my job and never looked back. So I love it.
So hold it. I'm also commercial. I think I get a 5% commission. This is called a OCD finder's fee. We can create a pyramid scheme.
Who pays that, Dave?
Yeah. Actually,
that?
It doesn't matter because I'm not going to get it. So, and by the way, Danny, I love people that have that passion. I mean, and this is, I mean, it's just fun to look at organization and go, wow, what's going on here? What could be done differently at Google or at Microsoft?
Yeah.
So that's the issue I'm really interested in.
Well, good, because that's what we want to talk to you about today. We are doing this season on reconnecting, particularly with respect to leadership. And when we came up with that topic, I said, oh, you know what? I know who we should talk to. And that's when you got that email from us. So we're super excited to talk to you about this today.
So I'll jump in here. When we were talking about this particular season, what we said is, people are really worried. They've been worried about the Great Resignation, but what we think they need to be worried is about reconnection, how we're going to be bringing people back together, connecting them to each other, connecting them to the organization, and particularly what's the roles for leaders. And so that was our perspective coming into this. I'd love to hear your thought on why you think connection is so important, and why do you think that folks have been focusing on it?
There's a lot of questions in there: the Great Resignation, the leadership role, and connection. So you got three bundles that are intertwined. You focused on connection. I love simplicity. I mean, my PhD is numerical taxonomy. It's the science of how do you take complex stuff and make them simple. So we look at what is it people need? What are some needs? Now, Chris made a comment, people, every generation has different needs. Some of that's true, but some of it's the same. We've identified four, and there seem to be four things people want from their interaction organization. One is be safe. I think, Chris, that is a newer one. I don't think physical and psychological safety was seen as that critical as much during COVID. I mean, physical, mass, psychological safety. Second, believe, meaning, purpose, not new, but people want to find meaning. They want to find purpose at any age. Become better, learn and grow. And then the fourth one is the one Stacia, you mentioned, belong, the need to connect. There's some great research out of Harvard that talks about the biggest predictor of life satisfaction over decades, and they have data, and you've probably seen the data, is your ability to build relationships with others. The Gallup organization, you got to have a best friend at work. I think the better question is you got to have a best friend who could care less about your work, because it isn't just work related. But that need to become, to be a part, to connect, to build relationships. I don't know if that's endemic. I don't know if it's psychological, but I think when organizations can create that sense of community, whatever you want to call it, good things happen. The resignation is less. People are less likely to leave because they're working with people they want to be with. They're more willing to share emotional connection. They're willing to have better experiences. And that belonging and connection is just such a critical part of good organizations today.
Add to that, I think that if we reflect back on the pandemic and so many people were alone or certainly had their social circles much reduced. And then also we look at the political landscape and some of these other things, and there's so much divisiveness. Our workplaces are one of the places where we can come together. And so that idea of connection, I think, is potentially even more important than it's ever been in the past.
Yeah, I mean, you see it in DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, circle the I. That's another term. I mean, there's a lot of terms: connection, belonging, inclusion. How do we get people to come together? Not with commonality. I mean, that's one of the dangers is there's some research in the United States, and I don't know if it's true around the world. They look at political voting where there's at least 20% Democrat or 20% Republican. So you basically surround yourself with like-minded people. That's gone from like 30% of polling places to 70 or 80%. And one of the dangers I see is that I have friends who all they watch in the United States is Fox TV, and they're surrounded by Foxans. I have others who all they watch is CNN, and they're surrounded by more liberal. And I think the challenge is, how do you create belonging in diversity? How do you find unity when the diversity is still a part of the difference? When my friend and I may disagree politically, we may have a lot of ites. We may have a lot of disagreements about, gender, about racial, about ethnic difference, but there are values we share. And I think organizations should be places where those shared values, belonging, inclusion, whatever you want to call it, come together.
Let's talk a little bit about your own personal experience with connection and how did you ensure for yourself that connections weren't lost over the course of the pandemic?
One, you got to initiate. So when the pandemic started, again, if you're from the United States, I'm going back 2 years in memory, the crisis was toilet paper. We didn't have toilet paper in the store. So my wife and I, do I have it? My wife and I decided in our neighborhood, I'll give a very personal example. We put together a care package. And in the care package, we had a power bar, a bottle of water, and a roll of toilet paper. And we knocked on doors in our neighborhood and we said, stay away 6 feet. We don't want to infect, but we have brought you something that's so valuable. And they'd open it up and go, wow, that is so cool. And 2 days later, one of the couples brought back the empty roll and said, oh, we have used this to great avail. So you got to have fun. And I think the other thing we're finding is technology is simply a tool. It's not a good or bad tool. And technology can isolate or connect. Right now, you're not seeing us, and that's good for everybody who's listening. But there are 4 people connected in 4 different spots, in 4 different rooms, and technology connects us in ways that we never would be before. And it's fun to connect in that way. I'll give an example of technology. Danny is in her office. You aren't seeing this. Danny, tell me a story of one of the pictures on your wall. So look at the pictures on your wall behind you. What's a story that tells me something about you? And if not the picture, something on your desk that just tells me a story about you.
Yeah, I have Rosie the Riveter and the We Can Do It poster hanging on my wall. And I lived in Michigan for a while, as that's where I met you, Dave, and lived near the plant where Rosie the Riveter was. And so the fact that we are all about women and empowering women, and the fact that I lived there makes that a really interesting and kind of special picture for me.
Sasha, let me use that as an example. One of the things I hope leaders are doing when we connect with people through technology, through Zoom or FaceTime or whatever it is, tell me a story about something in your office. Let me connect with you. I bet a lot of people have heard Danny's seasons before, and they didn't know that she's a Rosie the Riveter disciple. And, her nickname is Rosie. No, I mean, I think there are ways that technology allows us to check. One example, a woman, Pek Kem in Singapore, said, she's in HR. She said, I'm encouraging the public leaders, servants in the public sector, and she's in the public sector, to check in with every employee. We used to do managing by wandering around. Tom Peters and Waterman's great idea. We can't do that anymore. You can't just wander around, but we can check in. And so she said, I'm going to have every leader check in with their employees for 10 minutes every week. And you don't ask about work. What's going on? How are you doing? How's your son? How's COVID? How's your parents as they age? Whatever the question is, just do some check-in. I think those kinds of ideas are really cool. And technology, again, is just a tool. It can be an isolating tool or a connecting tool, or probably some of both.
I kind of want to follow up with that idea of connection and the fact that we're all in different places. Dave, I know for a fact that you're just an incredible introvert. You are an introvert, and that's cool because I am too. But I'm curious about, are there differences in this idea of connection between introverts and extroverts? Do we need to sort of personalize the idea of connection within organizations?
It's tricky. I think sometimes introverts have to get over themselves. That's counsel to me. Before COVID, I would never do a video. A face and ideas for radio, and sometimes I think introverts just have to say, get over yourself. If you scratch your head or you scratch your nose during a talk, get over yourself. Nobody else cares. And I think sometimes the technology allows even introverts to participate in an extroverted way. Now, on the other hand, I think the introvert extrovert, Danny, where were you New Year's Eve?
I was asleep. I got a 1-year-old, man.
By the way, I asked that because generally the introverts I was at home, I was reading a book, I was asleep. The extroverts get their energy from going downtown New York City, from the party time. I respect both of those. I happen to get my energy from being an introvert. Sometimes my goal is when I was traveling a lot, in my career travel a lot, is to say, okay, from the time I leave client in city A until I see client in city B, I'm going to have 12 hours of not talking to anybody. And it's so fun. I read a book, I do other things. But yeah, I think we have styles, but I think we can't let our style dictate our behavior. If I'm going to do what I do, I've got to behave as if I'm an extrovert.
Kind of a follow-on question there, which is we think about connection and the ideas we have around what connection even is, both before the pandemic and then during the pandemic. Do you think that we're now going to see a different way of thinking about connection as we enter kind of this new phase as people are returning to office and maybe hybrid work and all these permutations that we see?
Again, it's a great question. And I don't have a perfect answer. I mean, I think we have views. I think connection comes in lots of different ways. I call them the 4 E's: empathy, emotion, experience, and energy. Can I show empathy? How are you feeling? Can I share emotion? Can I be vulnerable? I'm struggling with that. Can I help you have a better experience? Believe, become, and belong. Can I help energy? Can I help you leave an interaction feeling better? I don't know if those occur. The dilemma I've got, and if you hear hesitancy, I know those can occur face to face. We've seen that. We've seen people coming to work. One of my takeaways is hybrid work is not new. I mean, we've done hybrid work for decades. When you come together, we've learned, don't do work that you could have done at home. So let's all go into our cubicle and we're going to come to the office and everybody's going to sit in a cubicle and do the work you could have done remotely. That doesn't make any sense at all. But there is a time to come together. And that when we're together, we should be together. We should be in rooms with flip charts and ideas and sharing. And so I think some of that 4 E's, emotion, empathy, energy, and experience, can be done both remotely and non-remotely. And I sense that. Stacia, you and Danny have been partners for how long?
4 years.
In the last 3 months, how often have you been together physically?
Once. But that was the first time since January
my wedding,
2020.
actually. Yeah.
Yeah. And here's the point. I don't think we have to be together to come together in unity of ideas. And some of that is generational. I mean, some of that is my generation is obviously older. We've done more in person. The dilemma is the next generation, the digital natives, say, I don't need to be in person. And then they quit the company because they haven't had the connection.
Yeah.
So they're living in a paradoxical fantasy world that you do need to have a connection so that resignation doesn't occur. So I hope we can see hybrid work and people coming together to be together when they're together and connecting virtually or connecting non-virtually. How often do you two connect in a week or in a day?
I mean, we have one formal meeting, but it's, almost every day.
It lasts 7 days.
In the last 7, I was at a funeral, so it was a little bit weird.
But we probably connect at least multiple times a day.
And here's 2 tests. Test number 1, if either, and by the way, I'm now querying you, which is fun. If either of you were feeling a professional or emotional crisis and feeling a need to reach out, and you reached out at whatever time, it could be at the 2:00 feeding for the 1-year-old. Stacia, I need to talk. How long before you'd respond?
As soon as I saw
10
it.
minutes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's one question, because sometimes digital connections seem like they're intimate and personal, but they wouldn't respond. And I'm your best friend on LinkedIn and I'll get back to you in a week. No. Yeah. Is there a quick response? And number 2, my ultimate test of leadership lately is, and I love data and research, as you do, I know, is when I leave an interaction with that person, how often do I feel better or worse about myself? And that can be through technology or it could be face to face. But when we leave this technology enabled call, are we going to feel better or worse about ourselves? Those 2 tests, will you respond and will you improve positivity, become something that can be done face to face or through technology.
This is great. I think this is making me think about something that I know you've thought about a lot, Dave, and that is trust. Trust in the context of forging strong connections. We know, if the Edelman Trust Barometer is any sign, we have a bit of a crisis around trust right now. But can you talk about trust and how it relates to connection in your mind?
Yeah, it's absolutely critical. I love the idea of trust because I think it's foundational. Absent trust, it's hard to build a connection. And trust is the abilities, predictability, dependability, reliability. If you say you will do A, are you predictable, reliable, dependable that you'll do A? And if not, there's not a sense of trust because there's high risk, there's high variability. I think one of the things that's interesting, Chris, about trust today, McKinsey did a piece a couple of years ago that I still haven't figured out. I'm still trying to study. They said Gen X people lack trust. And we see that because they've grown up in an environment where institutions don't provide trust, where politics don't provide trust, people are not predictable, et cetera. And they said one of the things that a lot of employees who want trust are looking for is truth. And they're saying the next generation wants truth that will build trust. So I've been thinking about, Chris, I don't have this worked out yet. A leader needs to be able to tell the truth in a positive way that will engender trust. You may not leave feeling like you're right, but somebody has told you the truth. They're trustworthy because they've given you truth. I mean, politicians, they don't tell the truth. I mean, they make promises they know they won't keep. And that erodes trust. Business leaders, we're going to keep, somebody just said, everyone's going to have to come back to the office. Well, that's just stupid. I mean, they make these broad proclamations. We stand for diversity. That's not truth. Those are just broad communication proclamations. And they create cynicism, not trust. So, Chris, the piece I'm struggling with trust, we get trust. I mean, Steve Covey, it's the Eighth Habit. Stephen M.R. Covey did a great book on the speed of trust. Dependable, predictable, reliable. I get those. I'm intrigued with how do leaders become carriers of truth that engenders trust by building truth with the next generation. I'm thinking about that and trying to sort that out.
I think at Microsoft, we tried just in terms of our leadership principles and simplifying them as much as possible per your guidance. And we came up with clarity. Leaders create clarity.
Nice.
And I think, truth can be a tricky one because you don't necessarily know the truth. You don't have all the facts. But clarity, I think, is helpful and maybe leads a little bit in the direction that you're talking about.
And I like clarity because truth is usually there's a right answer.
Correct.
The truth is, clarity is I don't have a right answer, but I'm going to be clear with you about where I am in the decision process. And as a leader, I'm going to be clear with you about a relationship. I'm going to go back and reemphasize something I said and give an example. I think good leaders work hard to make sure people leave an interaction feeling better about themselves. Some of that is trust, it's truth, it's clarity. A quick example. I had the privilege of coaching a very senior leader, not in HR, and I'm not going to name the company, big company, well-known company, harsh company, tough, demanding, etc. One of the employees that worked for this leader made a huge mistake that cost a lot of money, egregious mistake. This company did a lot of their communication through email so that it was documented and they were a virtual organization. So the leader wrote an email. You made a huge mistake that's going to cost us millions of dollars. If you don't fix it, you're going to be fired. He said, Dave, you're coaching me. You told me to talk to you before I sent stuff. And I said, thank you. Let me tweak it. 3 changes, really simple. I care about you. You have a great potential at this company. You made a huge mistake. It's going to cost us millions of dollars. What can we learn so that it won't happen again? Notice for me, I didn't change the message. You made a huge mistake and it's going to cost us money. You're not going to get fired. What did you learn? But then you put that little piece on the front. I care about you. You have great potential at this company and you goofed. To me, that's truth telling in a positive, affirming way. I think sometimes in the HR space, we don't want to do the middle part. You made a mistake. You got to get better. I'm not going to hide from that, but I'm going to frame it or couch it around connection, around I care about you. You have great potential and you made a mistake.
And a switch from threat to opportunity, right?
Oh, that's nice, Chris. That's that final piece. It's, if you don't fix it, you're fired. That's dumb. What do you learn so that, and by the way, if the person makes that mistake another couple of times, they're gone. To me, that's part of good leadership and the accountability.
Can I ask you another question about that? Because I know that you are also pretty active on the people analytics space, just like I am. And so what do you see as the role of metrics and data and analytics in this effort around truth and, to use Chris's word, clarity?
I think the analytics space needs some analytics. We actually collected data. Danny was a part of this study and she was a brilliant contributor. Did I read that right, Danny?
You sure did.
And one of the things we ask, mostly for HR professionals, but I think it would apply elsewhere, how well do you do analytics? 0 to 10. I mean, there's you can put that into competencies. And then we correlated that with your performance and with the business performance. Here's what we found. Almost no correlation. We did analytics on analytics. Those in HR that did analytics weren't better performers. Well, then we had to figure out why.
Weren't better performers according to themselves?
Other ratings, 360 ratings.
Got it.
And which is really interesting. And so I think the analytics field needs to get reinvented. I think the analytics field has relied on three assumptions. One is benchmark. Let's get data about how do I compare to somebody else?
Yeah.
How was my COVID versus somebody else's? Mine was minor, my brother's was major. How do I weigh versus somebody else who's my height and size? And we love to benchmark. We love best practices. I've written books. I've got books in my office. Oh, everybody says, oh, who does that really well? The third is predictive analytics. Why are they good? Those have been the anchors of analytics: benchmark, best practice, predictive analytics. I think we got to go to the next stage, which we call guidance. The goal of analytics is not to benchmark. How do I compare? It's not to learn who else is good or even why they're good. It's to make me better. It's to make me better, to give me guidance that will help me. And so I think the analytics field is consumed with employee engagement surveys. Here's how you compare to somebody else. Leadership style. Here's how you compare to somebody else. Here's an iconic best practice. What makes them good? Instead, we should say, what is it that works for you as a leader? In weight loss, there's a lot of programs. Which program is going to work for you? That's guidance. And guidance, by definition, is tailored to the outcomes that work for you and to your style. And so I think the analytics field has got to get over its addiction to benchmarking and best practices and predictive analytics and start looking more at what's the guidance I need for outcomes I care about. That's the work we've been trying to do.
Yeah. And I think where I was coming from is I think that the positive side, not necessarily the benchmarking or the best practices or even the predictive side of analytics, but the positive side in this context is by providing data. Let's take DEIB. By providing data there, you can at least give people clarity on where we are. It's not necessarily the right answer. It's not where we necessarily want to be, but it can be perceived as a lot more truthful. You know, back to what Chris was talking about a few minutes ago, the Edelman Trust Barometer, they showed that I think it was only like 20% of people thought that they had someone who would tell them the truth about DEIB in the organization. And so my hypothesis here is that, but if we can use data better and help people understand what's really happening, then we might be able to provide that clarity that leads to trust.
I would totally agree. Let me tell you the guidance piece. Let's say we have DEIB. We've got a diversity program. How do you manage differences? We've got an equity program. We've got an inclusion program and a belonging program. Here's my question. Each of those four, DEIB, have some initiatives under them. Here's the guidance question. Let's say you got 2 initiatives on each of the 4. You've got 8 initiatives: diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Which of those 8 initiatives is going to increase my intangible market value the most? Whoa, hadn't thought about that. Which of those 8 initiatives is going to increase employee sentiment and well-being? Whoa, I hadn't thought about that. Which of those initiatives of the 8 is going to increase our customer engagement to the company? For me, that's guidance. I agree with all those initiatives. The broad question is, I've got 4 categories, DEIB. I've got 2 initiatives in each. Where should I focus to get guidance? For example, in school, I could major in 10 different things. Which one is going to help me receive the goals that I want? So when I'm a guidance counselor, you start guidance by saying, well, what are your goals? I want to be rich. I want to be as rich as Danny Johnson.
English literature.
low.
Ouch, Chris.
That's good. I want to be rich. And then they say, okay, if that's really your goal, sell marijuana. I mean, if that is your dominant goal, sell drugs, because that's going to make you more money than English literature. Now, I say that as a joke. You'll get time off every 2 years for jail. But I think guidance starts with DEIB. It sounds great. And people are putting together DEIB indices. I'd start with guidance. What's the outcome I care about? Is it employee morale, productivity, retention? Is it customer satisfaction? Is it strategic reinvention? Is it investor value? Is it community reputation? Which of those initiatives in DEIB should I focus on to get the outcome that I care about the most? That's the guidance logic that I see most of the analytics people not doing.
Yeah. Well, I think it comes down to needing folks to understand where the business is going, right? It's some of the basic business stuff. What's our strategy? Where do we drive value from, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. So we just did a session at the University of Michigan, Go Blue, where I met and worked with Danny. We did a 2-week advanced HR program. At the end of the 2 weeks, people put together their action plans. That's a good way to burn the last half day. And somebody said, I'm going to go to a leadership center and leadership academy. I'm going to do DEI. They didn't have the B, but they should have. I'm going to go do this program. And I'm going to go back and tell my leaders, this is the agenda. And I said, you have failed the 2 weeks completely. When you go back to your leaders with retention, resignations an issue, culture change, leadership, DEIB, do not start with your program. The first question to your leadership team is, what are we trying to accomplish as a business with our employees, with our strategy, with our customers, with our investors? This is stakeholder analysis. It's not new. Which of those things are we really focused on as a business? Community reputation, legitimate. Citizenship, shareholder value, legitimate. It's not the only one, but it's one of them. Customer retention, good. Here's how my DEI culture, leadership, compensation program will enable that outcome. I can get us to the outcome we care about. To me, that's the issue that I wish we had better HR work on. And it's not benchmarking, predictive analytics. It's not best practice. It's what will get me to the outcomes that create long-term success. The line I love is that HR is not about HR for business or HR leaders. HR is about success in the marketplace. Because if our company doesn't succeed in the marketplace, there is no workplace. If we don't succeed in the marketplace, there is no workplace. Microsoft creates great experiences. Google will create better experiences. They've hired the best from Microsoft. That was quick. Because they succeed in the marketplace. I did a talk a month ago with the top 100 from a big company. And I said, you're really gutsy to hire me. I've worked for Digital, Enron, Circuit City, Toys R Us. And I said, what do they have in common? And they said, they've all gone broke. And I said, that's right. They have failed in the marketplace because they didn't create a workplace against the marketplace. And it's that logic of guidance. What can we do with an employee so that our customer has a better experience, so that our investor has a better experience? That's the connection that in the analytics, if I could wave a wand, I try to help us get more thought about.
I think you're leading us in the direction, you probably some clues on where we want to go next. And that is about leadership, specifically leadership, which includes a lot of guidance, but specifically in this changing world, right? And so maybe the first question is, do you think the leadership that we need in this current world of work or this near future of work is different from the leadership that we needed in the past? Has the emphasis changed on the different elements? How do you think leadership needs to respond to the world we're into?
I just did a 2-hour webinar on that before we got on the call. So I'm going to go back to a kind of bivariate answer. I think the principles of leadership haven't changed. I mean, Peter Drucker gave a talk, and I'm old enough to have heard it. He said, the greatest leadership in history was the pyramids. Think about what they did with the pyramids. They built these magnanimous places without technology. And so when we've done work, Chris, we've said there's 5 basic domains of leadership. And then I'm going to answer the second part. Strategy, where are we going? Pretty clear. You got to have a direction. 2, execution. How do we get there? 3 is talent. Who goes with us? 4, human capability. Who stays when we're gone? So how do you build future generation? And 5, personal proficiency. Have you taken care of yourself? I think those 5 domains are not new. We just finished a personal tour in the Mediterranean. We saw the Greek Empire. We saw the Roman Empire. We saw the Byzantine Empire. We saw a whole bunch of empires.
A bit like those companies you listed.
Yeah. Well, except they all lived for 300 to 500 years. I mean, the US, we think we're old at 250. We're adolescents. But I think you got to have those 5. But I think in those 5, we're seeing new things. For example, strategy. Yes, you got to have a direction. And by the way, I could go for a long time on this. I just went 2 hours. But let me give one quick idea on strategy, and then I'll stop. I think we live in a world of increased uncertainty. It's really hard to predict the future based on the present. I mean, nobody could have predicted COVID. And everyone who says, here's the new normal, I say, my gosh, you must be rich. because in 2020, you bought Tesla, Zoom, Amazon, and Apple stock. No, I didn't do that. Well, you didn't know the new normal. Neither do I. And so I think we need to harness and live more, Chris, in uncertainty than we've ever had to live before. And so we try to figure out principles of uncertainty, navigate paradox, experiment. Let me tell you where I'm coming out as one of the leadership ideas that it's not new, but it's more prevalent today. Chris, we have not met before. Do you have kids by chance? It doesn't matter.
I do, yeah.
How many?
2 boys.
I don't know their life stage, but let me just use it as a metaphor. Do you know what they're going to do professionally, where they're going to school, where they're going to marry, how they're going to live, what their lifestyle will be, given the world of the future? And the answer is probably not. You just don't know. I've got 3 kids. Danny's got a 1-year-old. Do you know what your 1-year-old is going to grow up to be? I have no clue. They may be a technologist. They may study English literature and
become rich.
And become rich. Yeah, become rich psychologically. Anyway, you don't know a lot of stuff. It's the same as a company. Do you know? I don't know. But here's what you know. And I'll test this, Chris. This is a little risky for a brand new relationship. What do you know about your relationship with your 2 boys? Will you love them?
100%.
By the way, for those who can't see, Chris is smiling. He's engaged. There's no question. By the way, 1-year-old is a teenager, Chris, and I don't know your kids' age. They're going to test that. Will you love me? We've been through that test. But let me tell you what that metaphor just said. In a world of uncertainty, focus on certainty. Focus on what you know. By the way, I came up with that for myself in February. We're coming out of COVID. Am I going to travel? I don't know. Am I going to continue to work in this field or another field? I don't know exactly. Am I going to do more with technology? I don't know exactly. So what do I know? I'm going to go back to Danny where you started. I know I'm going to learn. And I know I'm going to try to create value for someone else. I know that. And by the way, I'll finish that. Because if I focus on what I know with certainty, the uncertainty becomes less daunting. So Danny, I'm sorry I cut you off.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is a really interesting discussion because Chris was like 100%. Yeah, I love my kids. And you've been very certain about what you know as well. And I think there's a connection between that and the idea of connection with an organization. We can't tell you everything. We don't know everything that's going to happen, but that honesty and that sort of like, you can trust me in this thing probably provides quite a bit of connection.
Yeah. And I love that connection because, and again, that goes back to truth. Let me give an example. We fell into it and it's a longer story you don't want to hear about, but the Russian invasion in Ukraine, I haven't been watching TV the last 2 years. It's been distressing. Oh man, I'm going to go back into that moment in February. I turned it on and I started to cry. I mean, I was just fixated. I was an avalanche of emotion. We've had the opportunity to work with some Ukrainian people. Let me tell you what I've learned. They are the most agile, resilient, creative people I've almost ever run across. And let me give an example of what we know. Ukraine is one of the world's leading producers of grain. They produce wheat that they ship. Guess what? You can't ship it. The Russians have taken over the ports, and so the grain is not shippable. So what do the agriculture companies in Ukraine do? This is February and March. They say, we have grain that can't be shipped for a whole host of reasons. What are we going to do? What do we know for certain? We know for certain we're going to be innovative, resilient, and creative. Within 60 days, they are now millers of grain. They create flour and they create product that they sell to the Ukrainian military. By the way, the difference between an agriculture company growing and shipping grain and a milling company producing flour and food for the army is huge. And they did it in 60 days. They were certain, when I asked the Ukrainian folks who did that, we knew we could be resilient. That's our heritage. That's our lifestyle. We just didn't know where we had to be resilient. Once we got that knowledge, we changed. I'll give you one other story. We know we care about our people. That's part of connection. 5 million refugees in Romania, Poland, Estonia, mostly women, mostly with children because the men can't leave. We care about our employees and their families who've left. What do they need? We're going to be resilient. We know we'll serve them. 2 quick examples. One, these women need jobs. And one of the challenges is childcare. because a huge challenge. So the companies are setting up remote jobs. Technology company, we're going to hire 10 women. We're going to pay them. I'll do the metaphor real simple, 100. Everybody gets 10. But 2 of the 10 women are going to care for the children of all 10. And they all come from the same village. So they know each other. They allocate skill set. They all get 10 to watch kids while the other 8 work. What a cool thing. This is why I'm so impressed with the Ukrainian resilience, because they know they can be resilient. What do we need for our children? They need school. So the company says we're going to set up schools in Poland, Romania, Estonia, Lithuania, so that our refugees can get education for their kids. And we're going to find ways to do it. I don't know what's going to happen, but we can be resilient to do what we can do in the face of that. Anyway, that's now I'm going to play that all back. Chris, one of the goals of leaders is strategy. Where are we going? How do we position ourselves? In a world of uncertainty, I think one of the emerging skills is to find certainty. That's a long path.
I know we're coming up on time, but I want to circle back because what you've talked about is like a much deeper level of connection that most organizations are thinking about. When they're not talking about, free beer or ping pong tables, they're talking about childcare and schools and these types of things that bring people together within the company and connect them to the company in a much deeper way. I find that story about childcare incredibly touching. Give us your best advice, Dave. Like companies that are trying to build that kind of connection. And I do believe, I think Stacia mentioned this earlier, we've looked around and communities are sort of falling by the wayside. People aren't as religious anymore. And so a lot of people are looking toward the organization as a point of connection. So what advice do you give to leaders who are trying to do that?
Well, I'd start again, not with the solution, but with the outcome you care about. You're a leader. Mm-hmm. You want to succeed in the marketplace with customers. What's that going to take? It's going to take a stable, retention, committed, productive workforce. By the way, most leaders would say, well, that's obvious. Okay, what's it going to take to get there? Look at those 10 women sponsored by a company who are now doing stuff for a technology company in Poland or somebody else. What's their commitment to that company? It's going to be huge. It's going to be huge. And if they leave, they may come back. The Business Roundtable did a thing a year and a half ago, profit and purpose, profit and people.
Yeah.
I think they goofed. One word is off. Profit through purpose, profit through people. I think when we help leaders connect purpose and people, the P's, to performance, then I think we create a virtuous cycle. And so, Danny, my advice to leaders, don't be ashamed of performance, but see that the pathway to performance today, and Chris, this is an emerging one, is more than ever through human capability. It's through your people, your organization, your connection, your belonging. That when we can create that, we will have more sustained performance. And man, do I hope leaders can see that. The short-term consequence, and I think Ukraine is probably one of it may come down as, and again, who knows what's going to happen next? It's totally unclear. But the stories are just incredible of people who responded in a crisis. Now, I hope they can respond outside of a crisis, so that becomes a natural thing. But I'm an optimist because I think when people see the value we create virtually over time for others by success in the marketplace, it's a remarkably good thing. And hopefully people, and I know that's your audience, people will recognize that the people side of this equation is the highest variable one. And if we can manage that, we tend to be successful. So what do you think? I got to ask you, you've done a season, Chris, you've been in great companies, going to another great company. What would you say are a couple of lessons learned from this last 2 years? That feels like one.
We've done a lot of work on Collect Together on purpose, triggered by that press release. And that's really been on our minds. I think what I see, I actually took a couple of years out of corporate life and to partner with Danny and Stacia. And then going back in, I see a lot of fatigue. People have been able to hold it together. Productivity is miraculously where it needs to be. But I see a lot of fatigue in the organization, a lot of attention being paid to well-being and wellness. But really, it's been tough for people, I think. That's my observation.
I really resonate with that fatigue and well-being. This has been a tough time. It's interesting, leaders. I think leaders have had to be meaning makers. That's the purpose piece, collective together, you called it. Today, I think they have to be caregivers. and help people manage the fatigue. And they manage it in different ways. They manage stress in a different way. I've had the privilege of coaching leaders periodically. And when I do that, I always end the coaching with, are you taking care of yourself? And what do you do to take care of yourself? Well, I go get drunk. Okay, that's not a good solution. I go sell marijuana so I can be rich. That's not a good solution. The answers are all over: exercise, nutrition, family, friends, hobbies, religion, whatever it is. But I think that fatigue is a huge issue. What are you doing to take care of yourself so that you can care for others?
I think mine goes along with that just a little bit. We see a lot of organizations investing in wellness benefits and wellness programs, and these things add to the plate of the people. Organizations seem to be looking for something that we can buy that will solve some of the problems, when our research for the last 3 years have really emphasized the importance of managers and leaders and the caring relationships that they build. Before the pandemic, when we talked to people, they were like, leaders are, our managers suck. How do we fix our managers? But through the pandemic, I think organizations have realized the importance of those managers, and are doing so much more to enable them and to help them understand the importance of their role, and to make them more than just individual contributors that also manage the time of other people, but to actually do some of those things that you're talking about, the caregiver, building the relationships, eye to eye, knee to knee, those types of things.
And it's not easy to do virtually. And again, I think we're trying to discover how to do that, but I really like it. Stacia, what would you add from your observations? This is really, I'm taking notes here.
I would come back to this focus on purpose. People have a lot of alternatives. We've seen more gig work as an option. We've seen a lot of people who have chosen to opt out of the workforce during the pandemic, particularly caregivers and the like. And I think that organizations and leaders have had to give people a real reason for why should you come back and work in corporate America? What is the benefit? What are you going to get out of it? And I think purpose is one of the primary ways that people are seeing a way to fulfill something that was maybe missing for themselves, that during the pandemic in particular they came to see as having been missing. So I think leaders as purpose makers, you mentioned a moment ago, Dave, that you saw them as caregivers, but I think they're also purpose makers for people.
We call that meaning maker, the same thing. And by the way, we have 4 B's: be safe, physically and psychologically. That's almost the foundation today. Believe, that's meaning, purpose, and helping people find purpose at work. Become, that's grow, learn, develop your gifts, your talents. And then the 4th, and the one for me that's almost encapsulating, is belong. Mm-hmm. Create connection. Be safe, believe, become, and belong. That those premises become the premise of leadership. And doing that in a hybrid world, that's always tricky. But that's the world we're going to live in. And I hope organizations can get there. I hope leaders step up to it. And when they do, be safe, believe, become, and belong, those, I think, are the organizations that are going to reinvent themselves. That's what I think Microsoft has tried to do with the Become Better, the growth mindset work that Microsoft brought in. Chris, you may have brought that in, the Carol Dweck work.
That was definitely that. Yeah.
That's become growth mindset. I mean, it's brilliant. And I think the work at Google to try to create community, the Google rules, I think those ideas are not just socially desirable, but they also create a virtuous cycle or spiral of success in the marketplace. So that's the work we tried to do. That's really helpful. Thank you. I've got a couple of things here: trust, fatigue, collect together, and purpose. Care for yourself so you can care for others. Really nice. Thank you. Those are great takeaways for me.
Dave, I know we're at time, but we always ask everybody this last question, and we call it the purpose question. So it's very appropriate for the conversation we just had. Why do you personally do the work that you do?
I have no clue. I have no clue. I love the work I do. I mean, remember back to my story, OCD. I have OCD. I have obsessive compulsive disorder. I think organizations are places where people can reach their goals. And I think organizations can make life much better or much worse. And if you can create the right organization, it's a great setting. As you said, religions are falling in some places. Politicians are losing trust. Neighborhoods don't have trust. Hobby groups, Facebook groups seem to be in transit. If you can create a work organization where that occurs, I think it's a good thing for people. I mean, that's the agenda. This is, at some level, we're in an economic and lifestyle path. We're not going to change, but we want to make a difference. And I know that sounds naive and it sounds Pollyannish, but that is, we want to make a difference, and we feel that very strongly.
I think it's a great answer. Thank you so much, Dave, for spending an hour with us and sharing your thoughts and prompting thoughts from us. Yeah, it was a very rich conversation.
I'm going to push back, and this may get edited out. What's one thing you heard that reaffirms where you are, or that may tweak where you want to go? What's one thing you may have heard?
Personally, I want to be a better leader. The way that you've talked about the importance of that connection and the importance of relationships and trust makes me want to be a better leader. You've just mentioned a couple of things that are like, yeah.
Well, and we have a mutual friend. We just spent 2 weeks with him and his wife.
Yeah.
When I leave the interaction with this friend, I feel better about myself. That's an interesting thought test.
I'll say I'm going to think a lot about the idea that leadership is this set of fixed principles, and that you dial one of those principles or some of those principles up and down based on the situation. And you didn't say that in as many words, but that's what I was thinking as we were talking today. Sometimes I worry that we don't know how to lead in this new world. Yeah. And I even worry that leadership itself may be less necessary. Think about all those people who gig work for Uber. They don't have leaders. They're autonomous. They take care of a lot of their own needs. So I think a lot about that. I think you brought me back to some foundational principles that just might hold.
One of the great leaders in my history had a statement: we teach people correct principles, they govern themselves. And I think that's kind of in there. There are some principles of leadership. Peter Drucker, the pyramids were great leaders, but we govern differently today. I think finding certainty and uncertainty, defining culture as a value in the marketplace, not an internal set of values, getting guidance. Stacia, your comment, let's get beyond benchmarking and best practice. I think there are new practices with some fundamental principles.
I will reflect deeply on your comment about analytics and HR and the correlation to better outcomes. I fundamentally believe that data and the insights we can derive from that helps us make better decisions that should lead to better outcomes. But I think you have a good point that if the data is showing us that that is not the case, then what is going wrong? Is it on the people analytics team that's maybe not communicating the information effectively? Is it the analytics skills that the HR leaders have are not adequate? Is it that they're not translating that into outcomes that matter to business leaders? I think it's a good point, right? So if we're not achieving the outcome we have, at what point is it breaking? And I think I'm going to reflect on that.
When you find the answer, send it to me. I'll feel it in public.
Great question. Not just a podcast, a masterclass.
Guys are great. Thank you all.
Thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Workplace Stories. Danny and Stacia, how can listeners get more involved in the podcast and of course with your great work?
Well, they can follow Workplace Stories by Red Thread Research on the podcast platform of your choice. And you can go to ratethispodcast.com/workplace stories and leave us ratings and reviews.
You can also share this or your favorite episode with a colleague or a friend.
You can check out our website at redthreadresearch.com to follow all of our latest trends in people practices and sign up to participate in some of our research.
Or Stacia, they could maybe
sign up for our weekly newsletter at redthreadresearch.com/newsletter and consider joining the Red Thread community by joining our membership.
And lastly, we're on Twitter at redthreadre, that's REDTHREADRE, or look up Red Thread Research on LinkedIn and follow our work.
And thanks so much for listening.
We would like to thank our friends at Torch for sponsoring this podcast season. Torch is the people development platform that fuels leadership development through the power of trusted relationships. By combining coaching, mentoring, and collaborative learning, Torch helps you develop successful leaders aligned with your organization's strategy and values. Our customers deliver compelling leadership development experiences to their employees in support of their strategic initiatives. These include high-potential programs, new manager onboarding, DEI change management, and others. The result is increased employee engagement, retention, and performance. Visit trch.info/redthread for more information. Workplace Stories is a production of Red Thread Research and the Learning Futures Group. Thanks for listening.